Hello.
I always thought of myself as a woman who could walk through life without stirring the air too much. My students knew me as Professor Beatrice Lane, precise, composed, perhaps a touch too formal. But behind the calm exterior, I was anything but simple. I was a maze of careful choices and quiet fears. It was early June when Greg, my son, graduated high school. The ceremony had ended, the cap was tossed, and the photos were taken with proud, rehearsed smiles. I should have been floating with joy. Instead, I felt something strange sink in my chest. That evening, while we were clearing up the decorations at home, he mentioned he was applying to the college where I taught. I looked up from the leftover cake, surprised. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "There are other schools, ones more focused on creative disciplines. You said you wanted to study psychology, maybe something in the arts." He just shrugged. "I want to go there. But physics and math? Greg, you hated those subjects in high school." He looked at me then, not with defiance, but with that same unreadable calm I'd seen on his face all year. "I know. I just do." The conversation ended there, but the unease lingered like a shadow behind me. When the semester began, I pretended nothing had changed. Greg was just another freshman in the sea of young minds. I wasn't his direct instructor. That was a line I had drawn firmly, but he would still come by my office often. At first, I thought it was to borrow books or ask advice. But more often than not, he just sat there, silent. Sometimes with a sketchbook in his lap, sometimes with a coffee he'd picked up for me, though I never asked. "Did you need something?" I would ask gently, eyes darting between him and the mounting stack of papers on my desk. He'd shake his head. "Just thought I'd wait. It's late. We can walk home together." Our apartment was only 15 minutes from campus. It made sense, I told myself. Still, the air between us began to feel heavier, thicker, as if each word we left unsaid added another layer to the silence. In the next semester, David started showing interest in me. He was a physics lecturer, witty, rugged in an unpolished kind of way, and more charming than I liked to admit. It had been years since anyone had looked at me like that. I should have run the other way. Instead, I began to linger after meetings. I laughed at his dry jokes in the faculty lounge. I let my guard down just a little. One afternoon, as I stepped into the lecture hall, I saw Greg in the back row. David stood at the podium next to me, adjusting the mic, and cracked a joke I barely registered. When I turned to look at Greg again, his expression had changed. His jaw was tight. He rolled his eyes, slowly, deliberately, as if each movement was loaded with meaning I didn't understand. Later that evening, at home, I told Greg I was going on a date with David. He didn't reply. I remember that moment vividly. I stood in my bedroom with the door half open, slipping on a skirt over my underwear. My blouse still unbuttoned. The light was soft, the mirror fogged from my earlier shower. I didn't hear him enter until he was there, just standing watching. "Are you really going on a date in that underwear?" he asked. His voice was low, but sharp. I turned, startled. "Greg, what are you doing? You scared me." His face was pale, strained. "You're going to see him like that? Do you want him to see you like this?" "Greg, what's the matter with you? You're acting strange." And then it unraveled. All of it. His breath quickened. "I hate how he looks at you. I hate how they all look at you. I can't take it anymore. I don't understand what this is. But I'm going crazy, Mom. Every time I see you with someone else, it's like I'm breaking apart inside." The room was suddenly smaller. The soft lamp flickered slightly. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't the way a son should look at his mother. I should have told him to stop. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. I wanted to see it in his eyes, to understand whether this was confusion or something deeper. I stood so close I could feel his breath on my lips. He was trembling. And then he kissed me. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The walls, the floor, the air, it all disappeared. When he pulled back, his eyes were glassy, searching mine for something, anything. I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because something inside me was shifting. And I knew in that moment, there would be no easy way back. After that night, silence took on a different shape. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was filled with stolen glances, shallow breaths, and 100 questions neither of us dared to ask aloud. We didn't speak about the kiss. Not that evening. Not the morning after. But it lingered between us like the scent of something sweet and forbidden, carried into every room we entered. At college, Greg became more distant with others but closer to me. He stopped hiding his presence, choosing instead to wait outside my office almost every evening. I began to dread and crave those moments in equal measure. When I passed David in the halls, his cheerful grin and easy charm suddenly felt hollow, a prop in a play I no longer wanted to perform in. Still going out with David? Greg had asked one night, casually tossing the question while we walked through the near-empty quad. His voice was calm, but the tension in his fingers, tucked into his coat pockets, betrayed the storm within. I haven't decided, I replied. He's nice. Greg stopped walking. You don't love him. It wasn't a question. No, I don't. I admitted, the truth catching in my throat like a splinter. But sometimes being liked feels good too. Greg looked at me then, the campus lights casting soft shadows across his face. That's not the same as being seen. Really seen. And I couldn't argue with that. That night, something shifted again. He didn't return to his dorm. He fell asleep on the couch, his textbooks scattered around him like shields against reality. And when I came down in the early morning light, I saw him there, peaceful, vulnerable, and impossibly young, and something inside me tightened. I told myself I would talk to him, that I'd clear the air, set boundaries, make him understand this was a mistake. But each time I tried, his eyes would meet mine with a depth that silenced me. Weeks passed, and we stopped pretending. Slowly, things blurred. It began with simple things, shared dinners, long conversations about the world, books, life, philosophy. Then came the quieter, more intimate shifts. A hand resting too long on mine. A brush of shoulders in the hallway. One night, as I turned out the living room lights, he stood beside me and whispered, "You don't have to sleep alone." He didn't mean it crudely. There was no insinuation. Just a soft, aching suggestion. And I let him stay. We lay in my bed, backs turned, separated by breath and fear and something impossible to name. But over time, the space between us disappeared. Our hands found each other in sleep. Our legs brushed. One morning, I woke with his arm draped over me, his face buried in my hair. We were no longer just mother and son. We became something undefined. David noticed. Of course he did. I began canceling dinners. I forgot his birthday. When he asked if there was someone else, I hesitated just a moment too long. His eyes, once playful, narrowed with something sharp and hurt. At home, Greg began calling me B instead of Mom. A joke at first, then a habit, then a necessity. He said it made things feel less complicated. But it didn't. Nothing was simple anymore. We moved in unspoken harmony, like two people trapped in a glass house, afraid of being seen, yet unable to step apart. Neighbors began to notice. Small things. A curtain pulled too quickly. Laughter through the walls. 2 coffee mugs always left in the sink. I started avoiding the mailroom. Greg began using the back entrance more often. Still, we didn't stop. Every morning he woke before me, and every morning I found a small note left by my pillow. Compliments, poems, quotes from the books we read together. "You are my only gravity," one said. "No one has ever looked at me like you do." I should have ended it, but I didn't, because I, too, had never been seen like this. The seasons shifted without ceremony. Summer folded into autumn, and the first golden leaves traced quiet spirals outside our windows. But inside the house, time moved differently, less like a river, more like a clock with a broken hand, repeating the same hour over and over again. Greg had long stopped pretending to be just a student. He stopped going to most of his lectures altogether, though he still carried his books as though clinging to the performance of a life that no longer held meaning. Instead, He lingered in my world, haunting the edges of my schedule, waiting in the corridor outside my office like a shadow that belonged not to fear, but to devotion. One rainy afternoon, I caught David watching us. Greg had come to meet me after seminar, as he often did. I was talking to a colleague when I noticed David at the end of the hallway, leaning against the wall, arms folded. His eyes weren't confused. They were certain. And I knew, then, that I had lost the thin veil of professionalism I thought still protected us. That night, Greg found me sitting at the kitchen table, my untouched dinner turning cold on the plate. "He knows," I said quietly. Greg didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "He'll tell people," I added. "Maybe not right away. But it's in his nature. He'll let it slip like it's harmless gossip." Greg stepped closer, placed his hand gently over mine. "Then let them talk." "You don't understand, Greg. This is more than talk. It's our lives." He looked at me with a calm, determined gaze. "No. It's yours. I've already given mine to you." I wanted to argue, to remind him that he was only 19, that he had his whole future ahead of him. But the words tasted like lies. Because in truth, I didn't want him to choose anything else. Later, when I closed my bedroom door behind us, the quiet wrapped around us like fog. I watched him undress with the same reverence one might give a prayer. There was something sacred about the way he moved, carefully, not out of shyness, but like he was removing armor rather than clothing. We didn't speak. Not then. We didn't need to. When I woke before dawn, he was already awake, propped against the headboard, sketching something in a notepad. His face was soft with concentration. "What are you drawing?" I asked, my voice still frayed by sleep. He looked at me, and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "You. Not your face. Just your outline. The way the light touches your shoulder." I should have told him to stop, but I didn't. We settled into routines that mimicked the patterns of a quiet marriage. He made the coffee. I cooked breakfast. We passed books back and forth like secrets. We shared a toothbrush once, not because we had to, but because he liked the idea of our lives touching even in the most mundane ways. We laughed, too. Once, he pinned a note to the fridge that read, "We should start lying about how we met." And I laughed so hard, I had to sit down. But the world outside us was not still. Rumors began to form, like storm clouds. A colleague stopped inviting me to faculty dinners. Someone else made a joke in the lounge that landed too close to truth. I smiled politely, but my hands were shaking under the table. And the neighbors had changed, too. Mrs. Delaney, who had once brought over blueberry muffins without fail every Sunday, now only waved from her porch. The teenage girl across the street had started staring a little too long when we left the house together. We began hiding more. Greg insisted it didn't matter. "Let them stare," he said. "We're not hurting anyone." But I knew we were. I knew we would. Because the world doesn't accept a love that can't be named without causing wounds. Still, I stayed. Because every morning when Greg whispered, "You're not like anyone else," I felt the words wrap around the hollow places inside me. Because when he said, "You're mine," it didn't sound like a demand. It sounded like a promise. By the time winter curled itself around our little home, the transformation was complete. Greg no longer lived in the dorms. He never spoke of campus life. Instead, he filled our home with the color and rhythm of something unnameable, bringing flowers for no reason, painting strange but beautiful pieces he'd leave on the hallway floor, quoting poetry over scrambled eggs. If this was madness, it was the gentlest kind I had ever known. But even peace grows heavy when it rests on stolen time. One night, after a quiet dinner, I sat on the couch folding laundry while Greg leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me the way he often did. "What is it?" I asked, without looking up. "You look like a wife," he said. I paused, the warm towel in my hands suddenly heavy. "You don't say that to your mother," I murmured, even as my heart picked up pace. "You're not just my mother," he said. "You're the only person I've ever loved." His voice was steady, unapologetic. I didn't reply. I couldn't, because somewhere in the dark corners of my heart, I had begun to believe him. to need him. And that frightened me more than anything else. We became even more careful after that night. We stopped answering unexpected knocks on the door. We left the curtains drawn. When neighbors asked where Greg had been, I said he was studying abroad. When David tried to confront me in the parking lot, I said I was too busy for gossip. But the walls were closing in. And the truth is, I was tired. Not of Greg. Never of him. But of the hiding, the pretending, the way my body flinched every time the phone rang or a colleague paused too long before speaking. At night, Greg would lie beside me, his head on my shoulder, whispering things he couldn't say in daylight. You're not like anyone else. They don't deserve you. You saved me, Beat. And I believed him because I had never felt so loved, so needed, but also so trapped. It was a love without oxygen. Beautiful, bright, but burning too fast. We kept going. We celebrated Christmas in secret. He gave me a ring made of wire and sea glass. A real one comes later, he said. When we can breathe. I smiled. But inside, I knew we never would. The real fracture came one ordinary afternoon. I had gone to pick up dry cleaning. Something simple. But when I returned, a police officer was parked at the end of our block. David's car was just pulling away, and Mrs. Delaney was staring from her porch with a look that said she knew everything. Inside, Greg was calm. Too calm. What happened? I asked, my voice barely steady. He looked up from the couch. David came by. He said things. What kind of things? Greg stood slowly. He said he was going to ruin you. That people already suspect. I felt the air leave the room. Greg stepped closer. Let's leave. Tonight. We'll drive somewhere, find a town where no one knows us. We'll start over. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy who had once asked me what girls wanted, who used to draw cartoon monsters in the margins of his notebooks, who brought me wildflowers just to practice. But he was no longer a boy, and I was no longer just his mother. And that was the tragedy. I can't, I said, my voice breaking. Greg didn't speak. His hands trembled slightly, like he already knew this was the end of the story. I love you, I said. But I can't let you throw your life away. It's not a waste, he whispered. I reached for his face, held it like I had when he was a child. You'll forget me, I said. Not tomorrow, but someday. He shook his head, tears slipping down. I didn't kiss him goodbye. I just turned away. That night, I wrote a letter. To the college. To David. To Greg. I asked for forgiveness, without confession. I asked for silence, where silence would hurt least. Greg moved out 2 days later. He didn't leave a note. Only the sea glass ring, resting on my pillow like a memory made solid. I still wear it sometimes. Not out of guilt, but because once, for a brief moment in time, I was loved completely. And that kind of love, no matter how impossible, is never entirely lost.
Bye.